In the grand kingdom of Aldoria, where golden towers pierce the clouds and royal bloodlines stretch back centuries, not all fairy tales end with happily ever after. Behind the magnificent stone walls of Rosehaven Palace, where servants bow and courtiers whisper, a young princess carries a burden too heavy for her small shoulders. Princess Isabella's world changed forever when her beloved mother, Queen Elena, passed away in a tragic riding accident 2 years ago. Now, at 8 years old, she finds herself navigating the treacherous waters of palace life with a new stepmother who seems more interested in royal protocol than a grieving child's heart. What happens when innocent childish defiance meets royal expectations? When a desperate cry for attention echoes through marble hallways? When palace guards must choose between duty and compassion? This is the story of one fateful evening that would forever change the relationship between a lonely princess, her misunderstood stepmother, and the loyal guard who witnessed it all. Sometimes the most beautiful palaces hide the deepest pain, and sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places. The crown may be heavy, but a child's heart is heavier still. Princess Isabella stood at the tall window of her chambers, watching the morning mist dance across the royal gardens. The sun painted golden streaks across the marble pathways where she used to walk hand in hand with her mother, Queen Elena. Those days felt like distant dreams now, buried beneath 2 years of formal dinners, strict schedules, and the constant presence of her stepmother, Queen Victoria. The 8-year-old princess pressed her small palm against the cold glass, leaving a foggy handprint that would surely earn her another lecture about proper behavior. Everything seemed to earn her lectures these days. The way she held her fork during meals, how she curtsied to visiting dignitaries, even the manner in which she spoke to the palace staff. Queen Victoria had opinions about everything, and Isabella felt suffocated by the endless rules and expectations. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Your Royal Highness," came the gentle voice of Martha, her governess. "Queen Victoria requests your presence in the blue drawing room for your morning lessons." Isabella sighed, her breath creating another small cloud on the window. "Must I go, Martha? Can we not have lessons here today?" Martha entered the room, her kind eyes filled with understanding. She had served the royal family for over 20 years and had watched Isabella grow from a carefree toddler into this withdrawn, sometimes defiant child. The transformation broke Martha's heart, though she dared not speak against the new queen's methods. "I am afraid not, Princess. Her Majesty has specifically requested your attendance. She wishes to review your French pronunciation and discuss your upcoming presentation at the autumn court ceremony." The mention of the ceremony made Isabella's stomach twist with anxiety. Queen Victoria had been preparing her for weeks, drilling her on proper posture, memorizing lengthy speeches, and practicing elaborate curtsies. It was nothing like the simple, joyful celebrations her mother used to organize, where Isabella could laugh and play with the children of visiting nobles. "Very well," Isabella said, turning from the window with resignation. "But I do not understand why everything must be so complicated now. Mama never made me memorize so many rules." Martha helped Isabella straighten her deep blue velvet dress, smoothing the intricate golden embroidery that depicted the royal family crest. "Your mother was a remarkable woman, Princess, but Queen Victoria cares for you as well, even if she shows it differently. She wants to ensure you are prepared for your future role as a member of the royal family."
As they walked through the ornate hallways toward the blue drawing room, Isabella noticed how the palace staff bowed more formally than they used to.
The warm smiles and gentle conversations she once enjoyed with the servants had been replaced by proper protocol and respectful distance. Queen Victoria had instituted new rules about appropriate behavior between royalty and staff, claiming it was necessary for maintaining dignity and order. The blue drawing room was one of the most formal spaces in the palace, with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs. Queen Victoria sat perfectly straight in an ornate chair, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, her emerald green gown pristine and wrinkle-free. She embodied everything Isabella was supposed to become, poised, proper, and completely in control. "Good morning, Isabella," Queen Victoria said, her voice carrying the slight accent of her homeland, the neighboring kingdom of Serentia. "Please take your seat. We have much to accomplish this morning." Isabella curtsied as she had been taught, though she deliberately made it slightly less deep than required. It was a small act of rebellion that she knew Queen Victoria would notice, but likely not address in front of Martha. These tiny defiances had become Isabella's way of maintaining some sense of her own identity in a world that seemed determined to reshape her completely. "We shall begin with your French recitation," Queen Victoria continued, opening a leather-bound book. "Then we will practice your posture while walking, followed by a review of proper dinner conversation topics." The Duchess of Wintermere will be dining with us next week, and I expect you to conduct yourself with the utmost grace." As the lessons progressed, Isabella found herself growing increasingly frustrated. Every correction from Queen Victoria felt like criticism of not just her behavior, but of everything her mother had taught her. When Isabella pronounced a French word with the softer accent her mother had used, Queen Victoria insisted on the more formal Sorrentian pronunciation. When Isabella suggested they could discuss her favorite books during dinner with the Duchess, Queen Victoria explained that personal preferences were not appropriate topics for formal dining. "Your Majesty," Isabella said during a brief pause in the lessons, "might we perhaps include some music in today's lessons? Mama and I used to sing together during our morning time." Queen Victoria's expression remained neutral, but Isabella caught a flicker of something, perhaps annoyance or discomfort, in her green eyes. "Music is certainly important for a princess to master, Isabella. However, we must first ensure your foundational skills are properly developed. Perhaps we can arrange formal music lessons with the palace instructor next month." "But I do not want formal lessons," Isabella protested, her voice rising slightly. "I simply want to sing the songs Mama taught me. They make me happy and I remember her voice when I sing them." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece. Queen Victoria closed her book and looked directly at Isabella, her expression unreadable. "Isabella, I understand that you miss your mother. That is natural and expected. However, you are now 8 years old, and it is time to focus on your responsibilities as a princess rather than dwelling on the past." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Dwelling on the past? Her memories of her mother were not mere dwelling. They were the most precious things she possessed. The warmth of her mother's embrace, the sound of her laughter echoing through these same hallways, the gentle way she had taught Isabella about kindness and compassion. These memories were what made Isabella feel connected to love and joy in a palace that had grown cold and formal. "My memories of Mama are not dwelling," Isabella said, her voice trembling with emotion. "They are part of who I am. She taught me that being a princess means caring for people, not just following rules all the time." Queen Victoria sighed, and for a moment, Isabella thought she saw something softer in the older woman's expression. "Your mother was indeed a caring person, Isabella. But caring for people as a royal requires more than good intentions. It requires discipline, proper education, and the ability to represent the crown with dignity. These lessons may seem strict to you now, but they are preparing you for a lifetime of service to your kingdom." Isabella stared at her hands, folded in her lap as she had been taught. She wanted to understand Queen Victoria's perspective, but everything felt so rigid and cold compared to the warm, loving environment she had known with her mother. Even their father, King Frederick, seemed different now, more distant and formal, as though Queen Victoria's influence had changed him too. The remainder of the morning passed slowly, with Isabella mechanically repeating French phrases and practicing her posture while walking around the room. She felt like a doll being trained to perform rather than a child being nurtured and loved. When the lessons finally concluded, she curtsied politely and asked to be excused. "You may go," Queen Victoria said, "but please remember, Isabella, that this afternoon we will be reviewing your table manners with the head butler. The autumn court ceremony is only 3 weeks away, and every detail of your presentation must be perfect." Isabella nodded and left the room with Martha, but instead of returning to her chambers, she asked to visit the palace gardens. Martha agreed, understanding that the young princess needed fresh air and a break from the intensity of her morning lessons. The gardens had been Queen Elena's pride and joy, and Isabella felt her mother's presence most strongly among the roses and lavender bushes they had planted together. She found her favorite spot, a small stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree, where she and her mother used to read stories and watch the clouds. "Martha," Isabella said as they settled on the bench, "do you think Mama would be proud of how I am learning to be a proper princess?" Martha's heart ached at the question. She remembered Queen Elena as a woman who believed that true nobility came from kindness, empathy, and genuine connection with others. While Queen Victoria's methods were certainly traditional and appropriate for royal education, Martha worried that something essential was being lost in the process. "Your mother loved you exactly as you are, Princess," Martha said carefully. "She would want you to learn and grow, but she would also want you to maintain your kind heart and joyful spirit. Those are just as important as proper curtsy techniques." Isabella leaned against Martha's side, grateful for the woman's warmth and understanding. "I try to be good for Queen Victoria, but nothing I do seems right. She never smiles when I accomplish something well, and she always finds more things I need to improve. Sometimes I wonder if she even likes me at all." Martha stroked Isabella's hair gently. Change is difficult for everyone, Princess. Queen Victoria has taken on a tremendous responsibility in becoming your stepmother and the Queen of Aldoria. She may be showing her care in ways that feel unfamiliar to you, but that does not mean the care is not there. As they sat in the garden, Isabella watched the gardeners tending to her mother's roses. They worked with such gentle attention, understanding that each plant needed different care to bloom properly. She wondered why people could not be cared for with the same understanding. Why Queen Victoria seemed to believe that all princesses should grow in exactly the same way, following identical rules and expectations. That evening at dinner, the royal family gathered in the formal dining room. King Frederick sat at the head of the table, looking distinguished but tired. Queen Victoria maintained perfect posture throughout the meal, occasionally correcting Isabella's grip on her silverware or reminding her to keep her elbows off the table. The conversation was polite and proper, touching on matters of state and upcoming diplomatic visits. Isabella found herself longing for the informal family dinners she had shared with her parents before her mother's death. Those meals had been filled with laughter, stories about their day, and genuine interest in each other's thoughts and feelings. Now dinner felt like another lesson in royal protocol rather than family time. Isabella, King Frederick said during dessert, Queen Victoria tells me you have been working very hard on your preparations for the autumn court ceremony. I am proud of your dedication. Isabella managed a small smile. Thank you, Papa. I want to represent our family well. I am certain you will, he replied, but his attention was already turning to a conversation with Queen Victoria about trade negotiations with a neighboring kingdom. Later that night, as Martha helped Isabella prepare for bed, the young princess stood once again at her window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. The same mist that had danced in the morning light now created mysterious shadows among the trees and flower beds. Martha, Isabella said quietly, do you think things will ever feel like home again? Martha paused in braiding Isabella's hair. Home is not just a place, Princess. It is where we feel loved and understood. Sometimes we must work to create that feeling again when circumstances change. Your mother's love for you has not disappeared. It lives on in your memories and in your own capacity for love. Isabella nodded, though she still felt the weight of loneliness in her chest. As she climbed into her ornate bed with its silk curtains and velvet coverlets, she clutched a small locket that contained her mother's portrait. It was her most treasured possession, and Queen Victoria had not yet discovered it. To add it to the list of things that needed to be more appropriately royal, the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, with only the soft footsteps of guards making their rounds echoing through the marble hallways. Isabella lay awake for a long time, thinking about her mother's gentle voice singing lullabies, about the way Queen Victoria's lessons made her feel small and inadequate, and about the growing distance she sensed between herself and her father. She did not yet know that Queen Victoria also lay awake in the royal chambers, struggling with her own doubts about whether her strict approach was helping or harming the child she had promised King Frederick she would guide and protect. The new queen carried her own burdens, the pressure to live up to the memory of a beloved predecessor, the challenge of forming a bond with a grieving child, and the weight of preparing Isabella for a future filled with royal responsibilities that few people could truly understand. In different rooms of the same palace, both the young princess and her stepmother faced the darkness with heavy hearts, each feeling misunderstood and alone, neither realizing how much they both longed for the warmth of genuine family connection that seemed to have disappeared along with Queen Elena's gentle presence. The following morning brought unexpected chaos to the usually orderly palace routine. Isabella awoke to discover that her beloved locket, the one containing her mother's portrait, was missing from her nightstand where she always placed it before sleep. Panic seized her small chest as she searched frantically through her bed linens, under furniture, and in every drawer of her ornate dresser. "Martha!" she called out, her voice high with distress. "My locket is gone! I cannot find Mama's picture anywhere." Martha rushed into the room, immediately understanding the severity of the situation. The locket was Isabella's most precious possession, her tangible connection to her mother's memory. Together, they searched every corner of the princess's chambers, but the small golden pendant remained nowhere to be found. "Perhaps it fell off during yesterday's garden visit," Martha suggested gently. "We shall retrace your steps and ask the groundskeepers to help us look." But Isabella was already forming a different theory, one that filled her with a mixture of anger and heartbreak.
Queen Victoria took it, she whispered, her young voice trembling with accusation.
"She thinks my memories of Mama are inappropriate. She probably wants to lock it away like everything else that reminds me of how things used to be." Martha's eyes widened with concern. While she had witnessed Queen Victoria's strict approach to Isabella's education, she could not imagine the new queen taking such a cruel action. However, she also knew that Isabella's fears were not entirely unfounded. Queen Victoria had indeed expressed opinions about the importance of moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. "Princess, we must not make such serious accusations without proof," Martha said carefully. "Perhaps we should ask Queen Victoria directly if she has seen your locket. There may be a perfectly innocent explanation." Isabella's face flushed with indignation. The thought of politely asking Queen Victoria about the missing locket, when Isabella felt certain she had taken it, seemed impossible. How could she maintain proper royal courtesy while her heart was breaking over the loss of her most treasured keepsake? Meanwhile, in the Queen's private study, Victoria sat reviewing correspondence from various kingdoms and planning the details of the upcoming autumn court ceremony. She had risen early, as was her custom, to handle administrative duties before beginning Isabella's lessons. The weight of her responsibilities as both queen and stepmother pressed heavily on her shoulders, though she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge the emotional toll. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Enter," she called, expecting to see her personal secretary with the morning's agenda. Instead, King Frederick stepped into the room, his expression troubled. "Good morning, Victoria. I hope you slept well." "As well as can be expected," she replied, noting the tension in his voice. "Is something troubling you this morning?" Frederick moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where Isabella could often be found seeking solace. "I have been thinking about our conversation last week regarding Isabella's education. While I appreciate your dedication to preparing her for her royal duties, I wonder if we might consider allowing her some small comforts from her past." Queen Victoria set down her pen, sensing where this conversation might lead. "What sort of comforts are you referring to?" "Simple things," Frederick said, turning to face her. "Perhaps incorporating some of the songs Elena taught her into her music lessons, or allowing her to maintain certain traditions that brought her joy. I fear we may be erasing too much of her mother's influence in our efforts to prepare her for the future." The criticism, though gently delivered, stung Queen Victoria deeply. She had devoted countless hours to designing educational programs that would give Isabella every advantage in her future role. Every correction, every lesson, every rule was motivated by her determination to see the young princess succeed. The suggestion that her methods might be causing harm rather than help filled her with defensive frustration. "Frederick, I have spent months carefully studying the educational requirements for princesses in our allied kingdoms," Victoria replied, her voice maintaining its composure despite her inner turmoil. "Isabella will someday need to navigate complex diplomatic situations, represent our kingdom at international gatherings, and potentially rule in her own right. Nostalgia and sentiment, while understandable, will not prepare her for these realities." "I am not asking you to abandon her education," Frederick said, moving closer to her desk. "I am simply suggesting that we might find ways to honor Elena's memory while still preparing Isabella for her future. Surely there is room for both tradition and progress." Queen Victoria felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she experienced whenever Elena's name arose in conversation. She had never voiced her insecurities about being compared to Frederick's first wife, but the constant reminders of Elena's warmth and beloved memory made Victoria question whether she could ever truly fill that role in Isabella's life or Frederick's heart. "I will consider your suggestions," Victoria said finally, though her tone suggested the matter was closed for now. "Perhaps we can discuss specific modifications to Isabella's schedule after the autumn court ceremony has concluded."
Their conversation was interrupted by urgent knocking on the study door.
Martha entered with obvious distress written across her usually calm features. "Your Majesties, forgive the intrusion, but Princess Isabella is quite upset. She believes her mother's locket has been lost or misplaced. She has been searching her chambers for over an hour." Frederick immediately moved toward the door. "I will go to her at once." "Actually, Your Majesty," Martha continued hesitantly, "Princess Isabella has specifically asked to speak with Queen Victoria about the matter. She seems to believe, that is, she wonders if perhaps—" Queen Victoria rose from her chair, understanding the implication immediately. "She believes I've taken her locket." Martha nodded reluctantly. "I've tried to explain that such an accusation is inappropriate, but she is quite emotional about the situation. The locket was her most precious connection to her mother." Frederick looked between his wife and Martha, clearly struggling with the delicate nature of the situation. He wanted to comfort his daughter, but he also recognized that this confrontation between Isabella and Victoria needed to be resolved directly between them. I will speak with Isabella, Queen Victoria said, her voice steady despite the hurt she felt at being viewed as the villain in the child's story. Where is she now? In her chambers, Martha replied. But, Your Majesty, she is quite distraught. Perhaps it would be wise to allow her some time to compose herself before... No, Victoria interrupted gently.
If Isabella believes I have wronged her, we must address this matter immediately.
Allowing misunderstandings to fester serves no one well. As Queen Victoria made her way through the palace corridors toward Isabella's chambers, she reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. She had spent the past 2 years trying to provide stability and structure for a grieving child, only to find herself cast as the antagonist who threatened Isabella's connection to her mother's memory. Every attempted guidance was interpreted as criticism, every suggestion for improvement seen as rejection of Elena's legacy. Victoria paused outside Isabella's door, taking a moment to compose herself. Through the thick wood, she could hear muffled sobbing and the sound of furniture being moved as the search for the locket continued. Her heart ached for the child's distress, but she also felt a growing frustration at being automatically blamed for the loss. She knocked softly. Isabella, this is Queen Victoria. May I enter? The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. Finally, Isabella's small voice called out, Come in. Queen Victoria opened the door to find Isabella's usually pristine chambers in complete disarray. Bedsheets had been pulled off the bed, drawers hung open with their contents scattered, and cushions from the window seat lay strewn across the floor. In the center of this chaos stood Isabella, her hair disheveled, her morning dress wrinkled from crawling under furniture, and her eyes red with tears. I understand you believe I have taken your locket, Victoria said, closing the door behind her and speaking directly to the situation rather than offering empty pleasantries. Isabella's chin lifted with defiant courage that reminded Victoria startlingly of Elena's determination. Have you? She asked, her young voice carrying an edge of challenge that would have been unthinkable just months ago. No, Isabella, I have not taken your locket, Victoria replied honestly. But I can see why you might think I would. My efforts to help you move forward have clearly been interpreted as attempts to erase your mother's memory, which was never my intention. Isabella studied Victoria's face carefully, her 8-year-old intuition searching for signs of deception. What she saw instead was something she had not expected, genuine hurt and what might have been vulnerability in the Queen's usually controlled expression. Then where is it? Isabella asked, her voice breaking with renewed distress. I always put it on my nightstand before bed. Always. It has never been lost before. Queen Victoria moved carefully around the scattered belongings and sat on the edge of Isabella's bed, a gesture that was both informal and unprecedented in their relationship. I do not know where your locket is, but I promise we will find it. The entire palace staff will search if necessary. Isabella remained standing, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Why should I believe you? You think my memories of Mama are wrong. You want me to forget her and become someone completely different. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Victoria realized this conversation had become about far more than a missing piece of jewelry. This was about the fundamental misunderstanding that had been growing between them since her marriage to Frederick, a chasm of hurt feelings and misinterpreted intentions that had reached a critical point. Isabella, Victoria said carefully, please sit with me for a moment. I think it is time we spoke honestly about some things that have been troubling both of us. Reluctantly, Isabella perched on the very edge of the bed, as far from Victoria as possible, while still technically complying with the request. I did not know your mother personally, Victoria began, but I have heard countless stories about her kindness, her wisdom, and her deep love for you and your father. I have never wished to replace her in your heart or erase her influence from your life. Isabella looked at her with skeptical eyes.
But you change everything she taught me. But...
The way I speak French, the songs I sing, even how I talk to the servants. You make it seem like everything Mama did was wrong. Victoria felt a sharp pang of recognition. She had indeed been correcting many of Isabella's habits, but her motivations had been entirely focused on preparing the child for future success, not criticizing Elena's parenting. However, she was beginning to understand how her actions had been perceived through the eyes of a grieving 8-year-old. Isabella, when I suggest changes to your French pronunciation or your formal protocols, I am not saying your mother was wrong. I am trying to prepare you for situations she never had to face. Your mother ruled during peacetime with established allies. You may someday need to navigate more complex international relationships, where precise language and formal customs could mean the difference between peace and conflict. Isabella frowned, trying to process this explanation. But why can I not learn the new things and also keep some of Mama's ways? Why must everything be different? The question struck Victoria as both heartbreakingly simple and profoundly complex. Why indeed had she felt compelled to reshape every aspect of Isabella's education rather than building upon Elena's foundation? As she searched for an honest answer, Victoria began to confront some uncomfortable truths about her own motivations and insecurities. Perhaps, she said slowly, I have been trying so hard to prove that I could provide you with excellent preparation for your future that I forgot to consider what you might need in the present, and perhaps I have been unconsciously competing with your mother's memory instead of honoring it. Isabella's eyes widened slightly at this admission. In all their months of formal interactions, Queen Victoria had never spoken so openly about her own feelings or acknowledged any uncertainty about her methods. You have been competing with Mama? Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria took a deep breath, realizing that this moment of vulnerability might be their only chance to bridge the growing divide between them.
Your mother was universally beloved, Isabella.
Everyone who speaks of her uses words like warmth, joy, and natural grace. I am different. I was raised with great emphasis on duty, protocol, and achievement. When I became your stepmother, I wanted desperately to guide you well, but I only knew how to do so through the methods I had learned as a child. Isabella was quiet for several long moments, absorbing this unexpected glimpse into Queen Victoria's inner world. She had never considered that her stepmother might feel uncertain or insecure about anything. Victoria always seemed so confident in her corrections and suggestions. Do you miss having fun? Isabella asked suddenly. The question caught Victoria completely off guard. I beg your pardon. Do you ever want to just sing silly songs or run through the gardens or tell jokes at dinner? Or do you think those things are wrong? Victoria realized that Isabella was asking about far more than recreational activities. She was asking whether Victoria's approach to life left room for joy and spontaneity, the qualities that had made Elena so beloved. I have not thought about such things in many years, Victoria admitted. My own childhood emphasized preparation and responsibility above personal enjoyment. But that does not mean I believe joy is wrong, Isabella. Perhaps I simply do not know how to incorporate it into royal education. Isabella studied Victoria's face again, and for the first time she saw not the stern stepmother who criticized everything she did, but a woman who might be just as lonely and uncertain as Isabella herself felt. Maybe, Isabella said tentatively, we could figure out how to do both. Learn the important things you want to teach me, but also keep some of the happy things Mama showed me. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the rigid control she had maintained for so long. I would like that very much, Isabella, though I confess I may need your help remembering how to be less serious. For the first time in months, Isabella offered Victoria a genuine smile, small but real. I could teach you some of Mama's songs. They are not just silly, they tell stories about brave princesses who helped their people.
That sounds like excellent education disguised as entertainment,
Victoria replied. And Isabella was surprised to detect what might have been humor in her tone. Their conversation was interrupted by excited voices in the hallway outside Isabella's chambers. Martha's voice called out urgently, Your Royal Highness! Princess Isabella, we have found it. Both Isabella and Victoria rose from the bed as Martha burst into the room, followed by one of the palace gardeners, who held something small and golden in his dirt-stained hands. Your locket, Princess, the gardener said, offering the precious item with a respectful bow. I found it caught in the rose bushes near your favorite bench.
The chain must have broken yesterday when you were in the gardens.
Isabella's face lit up with pure relief and joy as she carefully took the locket from the gardener's hands.
She immediately opened it to ensure her mother's tiny portrait was unharmed, then clutched the pendant to her chest. Thank you, she whispered to the gardener. Thank you so much for finding it. After the gardener left with Martha's profuse thanks, Isabella stood holding her recovered treasure, suddenly feeling embarrassed about her earlier accusations against Queen Victoria. I am sorry I thought you took it, she said quietly, not quite meeting Victoria's eyes. I was frightened and angry, but that was not an excuse for saying such things. Victoria moved closer to Isabella, and for the first time since becoming her stepmother, she gently placed a hand on the child's shoulder. Your fear was understandable, Isabella. This locket represents something irreplaceably precious to you. I am simply grateful we found it. Isabella looked up at Victoria, seeing something different in the woman's expression, something softer and more genuine than the formal courtesy she usually displayed. Queen Victoria, Isabella said hesitantly, would you like to see Mama's picture? Victoria's breath caught slightly. In all their time together, Isabella had never offered to share anything connected to her mother's memory. The invitation represented a tentative gesture of trust that Victoria knew she must handle with great care. I would be honored, Victoria replied softly. Isabella opened the locket with reverent care, revealing a tiny but exquisitely detailed miniature portrait of Queen Elena. Even in the small painting, Elena's warmth and gentle beauty were unmistakable, and Victoria found herself understanding even more clearly why Isabella treasured this connection to her mother. She was very beautiful, Victoria said sincerely, and I can see so much of her kindness in your own expression, Isabella. Isabella smiled again, and this time the gesture reached her eyes. Martha says I have Mama's heart, but Papa's stubbornness. Victoria surprised herself by laughing softly. Faye, that sounds like an excellent combination for a future queen. As they stood together in Isabella's disheveled chambers, both stepmother and stepdaughter felt something new beginning between them. Not the instant warmth of a fairy tale transformation, but the genuine possibility of understanding, respect, and perhaps, eventually, affection, built on a foundation of honesty rather than formal obligation. 3 days had passed since the locket incident, and the atmosphere in the palace had shifted subtly but noticeably. Isabella and Queen Victoria had begun incorporating small changes into their daily routine. French lessons now included one of Elena's favorite songs translated into the language, and their afternoon walks included brief stops at Isabella's preferred spots in the garden. The progress was tentative, like two careful dancers learning new steps together, but it was genuine. However, this fragile piece was about to face its most severe test yet. The trouble began when a courier arrived with urgent correspondence from the Kingdom of Montclair, one of Eldoria's most important allies. King Frederick was meeting with his council when the message reached him, and the news it contained sent ripples of concern through the palace's political corridors. Princess Adelaide of Montclair, who was exactly Isabella's age, would be arriving for an unexpected diplomatic visit in just 2 days, accompanied by her formidable governess and a delegation of officials. The visit was ostensibly to strengthen the friendship between the two kingdoms, but everyone understood the deeper implications. Princess Adelaide was being considered as a potential future bride for Eldoria's neighboring prince, and this visit was an opportunity for the royal families to assess the young princess's suitability for such an important alliance. By extension, Isabella's own conduct during the visit would be scrutinized as a reflection of Eldoria's royal family and their ability to maintain important diplomatic relationships. Queen Victoria received the news with characteristic composure, but internally she felt a surge of anxiety. 2 days was barely enough time to prepare for such a significant event, and Isabella's education suddenly felt inadequate for the level of scrutiny they would face. All their recent progress in building a warmer relationship would mean nothing if Isabella failed to represent her family with proper dignity during this crucial visit. That evening, Victoria called for an emergency meeting in the blue drawing room. Isabella arrived expecting another pleasant lesson incorporating her mother's songs, only to find Queen Victoria standing rigidly beside a table covered with etiquette manuals, protocol guides, and detailed charts outlining proper procedures for receiving foreign royalty. Isabella, please take your seat immediately, Victoria said, her voice having returned to the formal tone Isabella thought they had left behind. We have an extremely important matter to discuss. Isabella's stomach dropped as she recognized the return of Victoria's strict demeanor. The gentle woman who had listened to her fears about the locket and admired her mother's portrait seemed to have vanished, replaced once again by the demanding stepmother who found fault with everything. Princess Adelaide of Montclair will be arriving the day after tomorrow for a diplomatic visit, Victoria continued, opening the largest of the etiquette manuals. This visit is of paramount importance to our kingdom's future alliances, and your conduct during her stay will be observed and evaluated by some of the most influential people in the region. Isabella felt overwhelmed by the sudden return to intense pressure and expectations. But we have been practicing my manners every day. Are they not sufficient? For ordinary occasions, yes, Victoria replied, beginning to pace the room in a way that reminded Isabella uncomfortably of their earliest lessons. However, this situation requires absolutely perfect execution of the most advanced royal protocols. We have less than 48 hours to prepare you for interactions that could affect the political relationships between 3 kingdoms. Victoria opened the manual to a page covered with diagrams showing proper curtsy depths for various ranks of foreign royalty. Your curtsy for Princess Adelaide must be precisely calibrated to acknowledge her status as a visiting princess while maintaining your position as the host royal.
Too shallow and you appear disrespectful, too deep and you diminish your own standing inappropriately.
Isabella stared at the confusing diagrams, feeling her newfound confidence crumbling.
How am I supposed to remember all these different measurements? What if I choose the wrong depth? You will not choose the wrong depth because we will practice until your muscle memory is perfect, Victoria replied, moving to another section of the manual. Additionally, your conversation topics must be carefully planned. Princess Adelaide has been educated in classical literature, advanced mathematics, and diplomatic history. You must be prepared to discuss these subjects intelligently without appearing to boast about your own knowledge. The list of requirements continued growing. Isabella must remember the specific greetings appropriate for each member of Adelaide's delegation, coordinate her wardrobe choices to complement but not upstage the visiting princess, demonstrate her musical abilities without seeming to show off, and navigate dinner conversation topics that would reflect well on Aldoria's cultural sophistication. Furthermore, Victoria continued, you must be particularly careful about any mention of personal topics. Princess Adelaide's mother died in childbirth when she was born, so any references to your own mother or family experiences must be handled with extreme sensitivity. Isabella felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. The idea that she couldn't even mention her beloved mother naturally in conversation felt like another betrayal of Elena's memory. So I must pretend Mama never existed. You must be thoughtful about how and when you discuss personal matters, Victoria corrected, though her tone remained strict. This is not about denying your mother's existence. It is about demonstrating the diplomatic sensitivity required for successful royal relationships.
As the evening wore on, the lessons grew increasingly intense.
Victoria drilled Isabella on proper pronunciation of Montclair names and titles, tested her knowledge of their kingdom's history and customs, and had her practice various curtsy combinations until her legs ached. Every mistake was corrected immediately. Every hesitation noted as something requiring additional practice. The warm, understanding woman who had sat on Isabella's bed and admitted to feeling insecure seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by the demanding educator who accepted nothing less than perfection. Isabella felt confused and betrayed by this sudden return to rigid expectations, especially after she had begun to believe that she and Victoria were building genuine trust. By the time the lessons concluded near midnight, Isabella was exhausted, overwhelmed, and angry. The careful progress they had made in understanding each other felt meaningless in the face of Victoria's panic about the upcoming visit. As Martha helped Isabella prepare for bed, the young princess felt more isolated and criticized than ever. The next day brought even more intensive preparation. Victoria had arranged for Isabella to practice her protocols with various members of the palace staff standing in for Adelaide's delegation. Every interaction was analysed and corrected, from the angle of Isabella's head during introductions to the precise timing of her responses to formal questions. During their afternoon practice session in the nursery, a room that had been chosen for its similarity in size to the formal reception hall, where Adelaide would be welcomed, Isabella's frustration reached a breaking point. She had just completed what she thought was a perfect curtsy sequence, when Victoria immediately began listing the elements that needed improvement. Your left foot was positioned 2 inches too far forward during the deep curtsy, Victoria said, consulting her notes, and your recovery was half a second too slow, which created an awkward pause in the ceremonial rhythm. Isabella looked at her stepmother in disbelief. 2 inches? Half a second? How can such tiny things possibly matter so much? Because Princess Adelaide's governess will notice those details, Victoria replied, her voice tense with anxiety about the upcoming visit. She will report every aspect of your presentation to King Alexandre, and those observations will influence how they perceive Aldoria's royal family for years to come. But you said we were going to work together, Isabella protested, her voice rising with emotion. You said we would find ways to include Mama's teachings alongside your lessons. You promised we would be less serious. Victoria felt a flash of irritation at Isabella's emotional outburst during such a critical preparation period. The pressure she was feeling about the visit had overwhelmed her good intentions about building a warmer relationship with Isabella, causing her to revert to the strict educational methods that felt safer and more controllable. Isabella, this is not the time for sentiment, Victoria said sharply. Princess Adelaide has been preparing for diplomatic interactions since she was 5 years old. She speaks 4 languages fluently, has memorized the genealogies of 12 royal families, and can discuss trade agreements with adult ministers. If you cannot match her level of preparation, you will embarrass our entire kingdom." Isabella's eyes flashed with a combination of hurt and anger that Victoria had never seen before. "So now you think I am stupid? Not good enough? Just like you thought about everything Mama taught me? I never said you were stupid," Victoria replied, though her tone remained frustratingly formal. "I am simply trying to ensure you are adequately prepared for an extremely important event by making me feel like nothing I do is ever good enough," Isabella shouted, her 8-year-old composure finally snapping under the accumulated pressure and disappointment. "By taking away every kind thing we started doing together and going back to treating me like a broken doll that needs to be fixed," Victoria stared at Isabella in shock. In all their months together, the young princess had never raised her voice or spoken with such direct accusation. The outburst was completely unlike Isabella's usual respectful behavior, even during their most difficult lessons. "Isabella, lower your voice immediately," Victoria commanded, her own stress causing her to respond with increased authority rather than understanding. This emotional display is exactly the kind of behavior that would be completely inappropriate in front of Princess Adelaide. "I don't care about Princess Adelaide,"
Isabella screamed, tears streaming down her face.
"I care about feeling like my own stepmother might actually care about me as a person, instead of just as a princess-shaped problem that needs to be solved." The words echoed through the nursery with devastating clarity. Victoria felt them hit her like physical blows, each one highlighting the painful truth about how her renewed focus on intensive preparation had undone the tentative trust they had begun building. "You think I do not care about you?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think you care about how I look to other people," Isabella replied, her small body trembling with emotion. "I think you care about whether I embarrass you, but I do not think you care about whether I am happy or scared or lonely inside." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but the honest pain in Isabella's expression stopped her. She realized with horrible clarity that everything Isabella had just said was at least partially true. In her panic about the upcoming visit, she had indeed prioritized Isabella's public presentation over her emotional well-being.
"Isabella, Victoria began, but she was interrupted by urgent pounding on the nursery door.
"Your Majesty," came the voice of Captain Davies, the head of the palace guard. "Is everything well? We heard shouting and wanted to ensure your safety." Victoria and Isabella stared at each other in mutual shock. Isabella's emotional outburst had been loud enough to carry through the thick nursery door and down the hallway, alerting the guards to what they perceived as a potential emergency. The idea that their private family conflict had become a security concern was mortifying for both of them. "We are quite well, Captain Davies," Victoria called out, trying to regain her composure. "There is no cause for concern." But the damage was already done. Within moments, the news would spread throughout the palace staff that Princess Isabella had been heard screaming at Queen Victoria with such intensity that the guards had felt compelled to intervene. The story would inevitably reach King Frederick, and possibly even spread beyond the palace walls before Princess Adelaide's arrival. Isabella realized immediately what her loss of control had caused. "Oh no," she whispered, her anger dissolving into horror. "Everyone will know. They will think I am a terrible princess who cannot control herself." Victoria saw the fear and regret in Isabella's face, and felt her heart break for the child who had already endured so much criticism and pressure. In trying to prepare Isabella for judgment from foreign royalty, Victoria had pushed her to an emotional breaking point that would likely be far more damaging than any minor protocol mistakes during Adelaide's visit. "Isabella," Victoria said softly, kneeling down to the child's level for the first time since their conversation about the locket. "What happened here is my responsibility, not yours. I pushed you too hard and forgot that you are still a little girl dealing with enormous pressures." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks on her flushed cheeks. "But I did shout at you. Mama would be ashamed of me for being so disrespectful." Victoria gently took Isabella's hands in hers, a gesture that surprised them both with its naturalness. "Your mother would understand that even princesses have limits to what they can endure. And she would want your stepmother to remember that preparing you for the future should never come at the cost of your present happiness." They could hear Captain Davies speaking quietly with other guards in the hallway, undoubtedly trying to determine what level of response was appropriate for the situation. The formal world of royal protocol and public appearances pressed against the nursery door, waiting to judge and analyze their private family crisis. "What are we going to do?" Isabella asked, her voice small and worried. Princess Adelaide will be here tomorrow, and now everyone knows I had a tantrum like a baby. Victoria looked at Isabella's tear-stained face and made a decision that surprised even herself. We are going to tell the truth, she said firmly. We are going to admit that we are both still learning how to be a family together, and that sometimes learning involves making mistakes. Isabella's eyes widened. We are going to tell Princess Adelaide that I shouted at you. We are going to show Princess Adelaide and everyone else that the royal family of Aldoria is strong enough to be honest about our challenges and mature enough to grow from our mistakes, Victoria replied. And we are going to do it together, as a family should.
For the first time since the crisis began, Isabella felt a spark of hope.
The idea that Victoria was willing to face potential embarrassment together, rather than placing all the blame on Isabella's shoulders, felt like a fundamental shift in their relationship. But what if Princess Adelaide thinks we are not a proper royal family? Isabella asked. Victoria smiled, a genuine warm expression that Isabella had rarely seen. Then perhaps Princess Adelaide is not the kind of person whose approval we need to worry about earning. Outside the nursery, Captain Davies made his decision about how to handle the unprecedented situation of a royal family member screaming loudly enough to alert security. He would file a discreet report noting that he had checked on concerning sounds from the nursery and found both Her Majesty and Princess Isabella in good health, with no security threat present. The details of what he might have overheard would remain confidential, as was appropriate for a loyal member of the Royal Guard. But Victoria and Isabella both knew that their moment of crisis had become a turning point that would define not only their relationship with each other, but how they would face the challenges of royal life together going forward. The scared, angry child and the overwhelmed stepmother who had shouted at each other in the nursery would need to find a way to become something stronger and more genuine before Princess Adelaide's delegation arrived to evaluate their fitness for the complex world of international royal diplomacy. The morning of Princess Adelaide's arrival dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the palace windows and painting golden rectangles across the marble floors. Isabella woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervousness despite the new understanding she had reached with Queen Victoria the evening before. After their emotional confrontation in the nursery, they had spent hours talking honestly about their fears, expectations, and hopes for the visit ahead. Victoria had made a remarkable decision. Instead of cramming more protocol lessons into their remaining time, she had chosen to focus on helping Isabella feel confident and genuine rather than perfectly programmed. They had practiced the essential diplomatic courtesies, but Victoria had also encouraged Isabella to trust her natural kindness and curiosity when interacting with their guest. Remember, Victoria had told her as they reviewed the basic greeting procedures one final time, Princess Adelaide is also 8 years old, far from home and probably just as nervous as you are. Your mother's greatest gift was her ability to make people feel welcomed and comfortable. That quality in you is far more valuable than perfect curtsy measurements. Now, as Martha helped Isabella dress in her finest gown, a deep sapphire blue silk with delicate silver embroidery that complemented her dark hair beautifully, Isabella tried to hold on to that reassurance. The dress had been her mother's choice for special occasions, and wearing it made Isabella feel connected to Elena's memory while still honoring Victoria's guidance about appropriate formal attire. Queen Victoria appeared at Isabella's door as Martha was putting the finishing touches on the princess's appearance. Victoria herself looked magnificent in an elegant emerald gown that reflected her Cerentian heritage while honoring Aldoria's royal colors. But more importantly to Isabella, Victoria's expression carried warmth and encouragement, rather than the tense anxiety that had marked their previous interactions about the visit.
You look absolutely beautiful, Isabella, Victoria said sincerely.
Every inch a princess of Aldoria, but also every inch yourself. Isabella smiled, feeling some of her nervousness transform into excitement. Do you think Princess Adelaide will like our palace? Mama always said the rose garden was the most beautiful in any kingdom. Then perhaps we shall make sure Princess Adelaide has time to see it, Victoria replied. Sometimes the most memorable diplomatic visits are the ones that include genuine friendship alongside formal protocols. As they made their way to the grand entrance hall where the welcoming ceremony would take place, Isabella noticed that the palace staff seemed unusually supportive in their interactions with her. Captain Davies offered her a respectful nod and an encouraging wink as they passed. The head butler, who had seemed intimidating during their practice sessions, gave her a subtle thumbs-up gesture that made her giggle quietly. Even the normally stoic footmen appeared to be offering silent support for their young princess. Isabella realized that news of her emotional outburst had indeed spread through the palace. But rather than viewing her as a failure, the staff seemed to see her as a brave child facing enormous pressures with courage. Their loyalty and affection, which had always existed but been somewhat hidden behind formal protocols, was now openly displayed in small gestures of encouragement. King Frederick joined them in the entrance hall, looking distinguished in his formal diplomatic attire. When he saw Isabella, his face lit up with genuine pride and affection, an expression that had become rare since Queen Victoria's arrival, but was now returning as the family dynamics grew healthier. "My dear daughter," he said, offering Isabella his arm in a gesture that acknowledged her growing maturity while still protecting her as his child. "You have prepared admirably for this important day. Your mother would be tremendously proud of how you have grown." The mention of Elena, offered naturally and without the tension that such references had previously carried, felt like a gift to Isabella. She squeezed her father's arm gratefully, then looked toward Victoria to include her in the family moment, rather than creating division between her parents. "Queen Victoria has taught me so much about representing our kingdom well," Isabella said diplomatically. "I hope I can honor both of my mothers today." Frederick's expression showed surprise and pleasure at Isabella's inclusive words, while Victoria felt a warm rush of emotion at being referred to as one of Isabella's mothers for the first time. The simple phrase represented a breakthrough in their relationship that neither had dared to hope for just days earlier. The sound of approaching carriages announced Princess Adelaide's arrival, and the royal family took their positions for the formal greeting ceremony. As the great doors of the palace opened and the Montclair delegation entered, Isabella felt her nervousness return but managed to maintain her composure by focusing on Victoria's advice about genuine warmth rather than perfect performance. Princess Adelaide proved to be a petite girl with auburn curls and intelligent green eyes that held both curiosity and carefully controlled nervousness. She was accompanied by her governess, a stern-looking woman whose scrutinizing gaze immediately reminded Isabella of Victoria's more intimidating moments, and several diplomatic officials who seemed intensely focused on observing every detail of the welcoming ceremony. As Adelaide approached for the formal introduction, Isabella executed her curtsy with reasonable precision. Not the robotic perfection Victoria had originally demanded, but a graceful gesture that conveyed appropriate respect while maintaining her natural dignity. More importantly, when she rose from the curtsy, Isabella offered Adelaide a genuine smile that reflected her mother's gift for making others feel welcome. "Princess Adelaide," Isabella said, her voice clear and confident, "welcome to Aldoria. We are honored by your visit and hope you will find our kingdom as beautiful as we find your presence here." The words were formal enough to satisfy diplomatic requirements, but they were delivered with such obvious sincerity that Adelaide's careful composure relaxed slightly into a more natural expression of interest and pleasure. "Thank you, Princess Isabella," Adelaide replied, her own voice carrying a slight accent that Isabella found charming rather than foreign. "I have heard wonderful things about Aldoria's gardens and libraries. I hope there will be opportunities to explore both during my stay." Victoria stepped forward to add her welcome, noting with satisfaction that the initial interaction between the two girls had already established a foundation of mutual respect and interest. "Princess Adelaide, we have planned activities that we hope will showcase the best of Aldoria while providing enjoyable experiences for both our young guests and their companions." As the formal portion of the welcome ceremony concluded and the delegation was escorted to their chambers to refresh themselves before the afternoon's planned activities, Isabella felt a surge of confidence. The dreaded first meeting had gone smoothly, and Princess Adelaide seemed genuinely pleasant rather than the intimidating diplomatic prodigy Isabella had imagined. However, the real test of their preparation came during the afternoon tea ceremony, where the two princesses would have extended time for conversation while the adults observed their interaction from a discreet distance. This was the moment when Isabella's education, personality, and diplomatic potential would be truly evaluated by the Montclair officials. The tea was served in the blue drawing room, with its elegant furnishings and afternoon light creating an atmosphere of refined formality. Isabella and Adelaide sat across from each other at a small table designed specifically for their conversation, while their respective guardians and the diplomatic observers positioned themselves around the room's periphery. Initially, the conversation followed safe, predictable topics, comments about the weather during Adelaide's journey, polite observations about the palace's beauty, and careful inquiries about each kingdom's recent celebrations and traditions. Both girls navigated these exchanges with competent diplomacy, but Isabella could sense that Adelaide was as constrained by formal expectations as she herself felt. It was when Adelaide mentioned her interest in the palace library that Isabella saw an opportunity to move beyond mere courtesy towards genuine connection. Instead of offering a standard response about their kingdom's literary collections, Isabella chose to share something more personal and meaningful. "Our library contains my mother's favorite poetry collection," Isabella said, her voice carrying real enthusiasm rather than diplomatic politeness. She used to read verses about brave princesses and wise queens who helped their people through difficult times. The stories taught me that being royal is not just about ceremonies and protocols, but about caring for others with courage and kindness. The mention of Isabella's mother created a moment of delicate silence in the room. Everyone present knew about Queen Elena's death and were uncertain how such personal references should be handled in formal diplomatic conversation. But Adelaide's response surprised the observers with its maturity and sensitivity. "My own mother died when I was very young," Adelaide said quietly, "so I understand how precious those memories must be to you. I would be honored to hear about the queens in your mother's stories, if you would be willing to share them." Isabella felt a rush of warmth toward this girl who had responded to her vulnerable admission with empathy rather than awkwardness. Looking quickly toward Victoria, who offered an encouraging nod, Isabella began sharing some of Elena's favorite tales about legendary queens who had used wisdom and compassion to solve problems that armies could not address. As Isabella spoke, Adelaide listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking thoughtful questions or sharing similar stories from her own kingdom's traditions. The conversation gradually evolved from a diplomatic exchange into something resembling actual friendship between two intelligent children who shared common experiences of loss, responsibility, and the challenge of growing up in the public eye. Victoria watched this transformation with growing amazement and pride. Instead of the rigid performance she had originally planned to drill into Isabella, she was witnessing something far more valuable: her stepdaughter's natural ability to create meaningful connections with others through honesty, empathy, and genuine interest in their experiences. When Adelaide asked about Aldoria's gardens, Isabella's face lit up completely. "Would you like to see my mother's rose garden? It is the most beautiful part of the palace, and I know stories about how she designed each section to represent different virtues that queens should embody." Adelaide's enthusiasm was immediate and obvious. "I would love that more than anything. I am passionate about botany and have been hoping to study different approaches to royal garden design." As the two girls made plans for their garden expedition, with Adelaide's governess and Victoria coordinating appropriate supervision and timing, the Montclair diplomatic observers began exchanging subtle but positive signals about the success of the interaction. Princess Adelaide was clearly enjoying herself genuinely rather than merely fulfilling diplomatic obligations. And Princess Isabella had demonstrated both proper training and natural charm that reflected well on Aldoria's royal family. The garden visit that afternoon proved to be the highlight of Adelaide's stay. Isabella guided her guests through the various sections Elena had created, sharing not just the botanical information, but the personal stories and philosophical meanings behind each design choice. Adelaide contributed her own knowledge about plant varieties and garden architecture, creating a conversation that was both educational and deeply engaging for both girls. When they reached Isabella's favorite bench beneath the ancient oak tree, Adelaide asked if they might sit for a few minutes to rest and continue talking. As they settled onto the stone seat where Isabella had spent so many hours missing her mother, Adelaide made an observation that touched Isabella deeply. "You speak about your mother with such love and joy," Adelaide said. "It is clear that her influence made you into someone who genuinely cares about others. That quality is rarer in royal circles than you might imagine." Isabella looked at Adelaide with new understanding. "Do you sometimes feel lonely, even when you are surrounded by people all the time?" Adelaide nodded emphatically. "Always. Most people interact with my title rather than with me as a person. But talking with you feels different, like you see me as Adelaide who happens to be a princess, rather than Princess Adelaide who might happen to have a personality." This conversation marked the beginning of what would become a lasting friendship between the two girls, but it also represented something more significant for Isabella's relationship with Queen Victoria. As they walked back toward the palace, Adelaide made a comment that would stay with Isabella for years to come. "Princess Isabella, I hope you know how fortunate you are to have Queen Victoria guiding your education. My governess tells me she has a reputation throughout royal circles as someone who truly understands how to prepare young royals for the complexities of modern diplomacy while still allowing them to maintain their individual characters." Isabella looked at Adelaide in surprise. "Really? I did not know Queen Victoria was so well regarded." "Oh, absolutely," Adelaide continued. "When I told my governess I would be visiting Aldoria, she specifically mentioned that Queen Victoria was known for her innovative approaches to royal education. She said Queen Victoria understood that future queens and princesses would need different skills than previous generations, and that she was gifted at developing those abilities in her students. This external validation of Victoria's methods and intentions gave Isabella a completely new perspective on her stepmother's efforts. She began to understand that Victoria's high expectations and detailed instruction came not from criticism of Isabella's natural abilities, but from a genuine desire to give Isabella every possible advantage in a challenging world. That evening's formal dinner provided the final test of Isabella's diplomatic preparation, and she navigated the complex social dynamics with confidence that surprised even herself. She conversed knowledgeably with Adelaide's governess about literature, engaged diplomatically with the Montclair officials about cultural exchanges between their kingdoms, and managed to include references to both her mother's wisdom and Victoria's guidance in ways that honoured both influences on her development. When Princess Adelaide's visit concluded the following day, both girls were reluctant to say goodbye to their new friendship. Adelaide invited Isabella to visit Montclair the following summer, and Isabella extended an invitation for Adelaide to return to Eldoria whenever diplomatic circumstances permitted. As the Montclair delegation departed, King Frederick, Queen Victoria, and Isabella stood together on the palace steps, waving farewell until the carriages disappeared from view. Once they were alone, Frederick turned to his wife and daughter with obvious pride and satisfaction. "That," he said simply, "was exemplary diplomacy conducted with genuine warmth and mutual respect. You have both demonstrated that Eldoria's royal family is prepared to meet the challenges of our changing world while maintaining the values that make our kingdom worth representing." Victoria felt tears of relief and pride gathering in her eyes. The visit that had seemed like such an overwhelming test had become instead a celebration of Isabella's natural abilities and their growing success as a blended family working together toward common goals. "Isabella," Victoria said, taking the young princess's hand, "I owe you an apology for allowing my anxiety about this visit to overshadow the progress we had made in understanding each other. You conducted yourself magnificently, but more importantly, you remained true to your kind heart while meeting every diplomatic requirement." Isabella squeezed Victoria's hand in return. "And I owe you gratitude for teaching me that I could be both polite and genuine at the same time. Princess Adelaide helped me understand that your lessons were not meant to change who I am, but to give me tools for sharing who I am more effectively with others." As they walked back into the palace together, King Frederick reflected on how much their family dynamic had improved through the challenge of preparing for and hosting Princess Adelaide's visit. The crisis that had seemed likely to damage their relationships had instead forced them to communicate more honestly and work together more effectively than ever before. That evening, as Isabella prepared for bed with Martha's help, she realized that for the first time since her mother's death, she felt genuinely optimistic about her future as a princess of Eldoria. She had discovered that she could honor her mother's memory while embracing Victoria's guidance, that she could maintain her authentic self while meeting royal expectations, and that being part of a blended family could create strength rather than division when everyone committed to understanding and supporting each other. Queen Victoria, meanwhile, reflected on how much she had learned about effective step-parenting through their recent challenges. Her rigid approach to Isabella's education had been motivated by love and concern, but it had needed to be balanced with patience, understanding, and respect for the child's emotional needs and individual personality. As the palace settled into its nighttime quiet, both stepmother and stepdaughter felt grateful for the difficult but ultimately transformative experience they had navigated together. Princess Adelaide's visit had provided them with an external validation of their progress as a family, but more importantly, it had demonstrated to themselves that they could face challenges together with honesty, mutual support, and genuine affection. The little princess who had once felt trapped between her mother's memory and her stepmother's expectations had discovered that she could honor both while becoming her own unique version of royalty. And the queen who had once felt inadequate in comparison to her predecessor's beloved memory had learned that she could contribute her own valuable gifts to Isabella's development without competing with or diminishing Elena's lasting influence on her daughter's heart.